Hi everybody, I'm Kathy Resnicek.
I'm Richard Pressler with All Connected.
And today we're going to be talking about Assignment 2 in Module 1 in the Networking Fundamentals module.
That's right.
In the Tapped Wired program. Whew, that's a mouthful. All right.
The title's almost long enough to make the whole course.
It's great though. So Assignment 2 is looking at all the equipment that goes in a wired networking network, right?
Right.
So we talked about all the cabling that we need to kind of hook everything up in Assignment 1. So give me a little bit of overview of what we're going to be seeing in Assignment 2.
Sure. So now we're talking about what to plug the cables into, because cables on their own are useless, right?
Well,
they don't do anything.
Cat toys, but other than that. Yeah.
So now we're going to get into what is a hub, what is a switch, what is a router,
Okay.
what is a firewall. These are basics that are necessary in order to understand how all of these components fit together.
That makes
And some
sense.
of these pieces of equipment are quite expensive too, so it's important to really understand what they're capable of. Now, when you're picking a switch, for example, oftentimes you're picking it based upon the medium available. So if you have a lot of Cat6 cabling, then you're going to need switches that have a lot of ports in order to support all of that cabling that has been installed. So sometimes you'll even see in a closet, you'll see stacks of switches on top of each other to provide the port density necessary. And then from those switches, you'll often have some sort of a backbone. It could be fiber optic, for example, which we talked about in Assignment 1. But you'll have a backbone that connects that closet to, say, a master closet, a main distribution frame, or MDF. So you could have a distribution.
I always wondered what that MDF stood for. That's great.
Well, you have intermediate distribution
Yeah.
frames, which are the small closets where switches go to support
IDFs.
end users, IDFs, and then you'll have MDFs where all the aggregation occurs.
Okay.
So you basically will have these different types of connectors. You might have fiber optic transceivers, for example, and so the switch has to support those various types of connectors.
That makes sense.
Something that's critical to understand for this assignment, Kathy, is that it's all about segmentation, really. When you dig into the types of equipment, they are providing various levels of segmentation within the network. So for example, a hub really doesn't provide any segmentation. A hub, and that's why we don't use them much anymore, everybody plugged into the hub has to figure out when they're allowed to talk and when they have to listen with each other. So there's a lot of errors. There's a lot of collisions where two computers are talking at the same time on a hub, and therefore that data is essentially corrupt.
So who can go and who has to wait?
Yeah, almost like getting onto the freeway, right?
Right.
With no light system. Like you just have to work it out with the other drivers. And the more lanes there are to get on, the more chaotic it becomes.
Yes.
So we don't use those much anymore.
Okay.
But we use switches, and switches provide collision domain segmentation. So on every single switch port, it's essentially a collision domain. So you have your own private lane onto the freeway, you could say.
Oh, that's nice.
You have your own access when you're on that switch port. And then routers provide logical segmentation between entire networks. So a router will be the segmentation point between say an IP subnet.
Okay.
So your entire addressing segment will exist in one interface of the router, and then it's responsible for getting data to the other segments. Or say on the internet, it's responsible for getting data to other routers to transmit across the internet.
Which is really important.
Yeah, and we use the internet a lot because everyone understands somewhat like how it works, but really it's just a massive WAN. It's a massive network
and
of
a
routers.
WAN is a
wide area network.
Okay.
Yeah, and the internet's the widest area network, you could
widest,
say. Well, at least until there's interplanetary communications.
Well, yeah.
But the equipment we're talking about here is really it's segmentation.
Okay.
One thing you'll notice in this assignment is that some equipment has overlap with features with other types of equipment. So for example, you might buy a switch that also has routing features. So that switch could act as a router on your network, and it could do that IP segmentation, right? You could also buy a firewall, and the firewall seems to have a lot of routing features. It supports routing protocols, it can route between segments, and that's all true. But for this assignment, don't get mired down in those kinds of details too much. It's important to focus on the reason that the piece of equipment exists in the first place, and try to gain an understanding of what it's doing at layer 1, what it's doing at layer 2, what it's doing at layer 3 of the model we're going to talk about at the end of the course, but basically understanding where is its segmentation.
And so that's really interesting, but it sounds like there's a lot of equipment to consider, and it kind of sounds expensive. So how do most K-12 districts who, you know, most of us struggle with finances just to keep a good school afloat or to keep our district office running? So how do you deal with all this equipment and budgetary issues?
Well, one thing I think that really helps K-12 school districts is to realize the purpose of the piece of equipment and not get too stuck on the manufacturer. That helps reduce costs because then when you're putting out a bid, for example, in the bid you can say this equipment has to do X, Y, and Z because it's a switch and we need it to be a managed switch, for example. We need it to have these features. But you can get the manufacturers to kind of bid against each other and give you better pricing because you're not locked into a single manufacturer. And what's nice is we're almost in all cases talking about standards-based protocols. So everything we're discussing is compatible from one switch manufacturer to another switch manufacturer. So you can plug a fiber optic cable from, you know, an HP switch into a Cisco switch. And you're not really worried about whether or not it'll function as long as you understand the wavelength that that fiber optic transceiver is operating at and that they're fundamentally compatible with each other. Well, once you have that knowledge, you can save the district a lot of money just by understanding what the equipment is really capable of and using it to its maximum efficiency, basically. And I'm hoping that this course helps people to realize that and to kind of understand the equipment choices that they're making. And some of it is very expensive. You can't avoid that at all times.
But you want
should
to
know what you're
maximize
getting.
what you can get.
And purchase what the district needs, not over purchase, right?
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of bidding, in the TAPD program, we also have a course on procurement.
Oh, that's right.
And that's where you can learn all about the bid process, the RFP process, and all the exceptions there are to all of those components. So,
There you go. Excellent.